Detective Marcus Thorne pulled up to the abandoned warehouse district, the sirenless, late-night air chilling his bones. The location was a notorious industrial ruin known as Sector 9, a place where sound seemed to die prematurely. The case involved the disappearance of Amelia Rhys, a freelance journalist who specialized in acoustics and unexplained sonic phenomena. Her last known location was the central building in Sector 9, a massive, concrete structure affectionately called the silo due to its sound-dampening properties. Sergeant Reyes met Thorne at the entrance, his face grim. "We found her car, Detective. Keys in the ignition, but the engine is cold. No sign of a struggle, no forced entry on the building," Reyes reported, handing Thorne a thermal reading. "But look at this." The thermal image showed a small, enclosed room deep inside the silo. The room was unnaturally cold, registering below freezing despite the ambient temperature being well above zero. "She was obsessed with the acoustic properties of this building," Reyes continued. "She believed the concrete here created pockets of absolute silence, places where sound couldn't decay, only accumulate." They entered the silo. The silence was immediate and oppressive. Every footstep, every breath, seemed to be instantly muffled and absorbed. They found Amelia Rhys's equipment bag in a central corridor. Inside, Thorne found a high-end parabolic microphone, a digital recorder, and a small, leather-bound journal. The final entry, dated yesterday, was frantic. "I found the chamber. The silence isn't natural, it's saturated. The sounds are trapped, waiting for release. I recorded something impossible, a scream with no decay, a sound that has repeated hundreds of times. The witness is the final component. The echo is forming." Thorne took the digital recorder. He hit play. The recording was dominated by overwhelming white noise, a dense, chaotic static. But beneath the static, Thorne isolated a clear, repeating sequence, a faint, high-pitched whisper that cycled exactly 34 times. Thorne couldn't make out the words, but the repetition itself was deeply unsettling. He looked at the thermal map again, pointing to the unnaturally cold room. "The chamber. That's where the accumulated sound is. We need to find her final perspective." They located the room, a small, windowless concrete cell with a heavy steel door, its surface covered in a thin layer of frost. Reyes forced the door open. The cold was immediate and breathtaking. The room was empty, save for a single item positioned precisely in the center, a wooden chair. Amelia Rhys was gone. But on the seat of the chair, Thorne found a horrifying sight, a small, neat pile of human hair, cut and meticulously arranged to form a crude ear shape. And then, Thorne looked up at the ceiling. The rough concrete surface above the chair was covered in a bizarre, swirling pattern of dark, oily residue. It looked like 1,000 screaming faces pressed into the concrete, silently frozen. As Thorne photographed the ceiling, his camera picked up an immediate anomaly. The spiraling pattern wasn't residue. It was a dense cloud of microscopic, vibrating dust that emitted a faint, high-frequency tone, a sound that, though silent to the human ear, caused the camera's light meter to jump wildly. Detective Thorne quickly stepped back from the cold room, the scent of ozone and chilled concrete assaulting him. The chilling sight of the hair arranged into an ear shape and the silently vibrating dust cloud on the ceiling confirmed the grave danger. "Reyes, lock down this room. Do not let anyone touch the chair or the ceiling," Thorne ordered, his voice echoing unnaturally in the corridor's muffled space. He focused on the chilling discovery, the ear shape and the journal entry about the witness. The hair arranged like an ear, she was making a dedication, Reyes observed grimly. A sacrifice to the sound. Thorne picked up Amelia Rhys's recorder again. He needed to decipher the content of the 34th whisper before the accumulated sound claimed another victim. He returned to the journal. The next entry provided a terrifying clarification. The silo acts as a sonic funnel. Every sound made here doesn't decay, it's compressed, creating a dense, acoustic matter, the echo. The scream is the sound of the previous witness. The witness must listen to the complete cycle, the 34 whispers, to stabilize the echo. Thorne understood. Amelia Rhys had been forced to become the witness, and the sound accumulation was now complete. The terrifying ear was the final offering, providing the necessary anatomical structure for the ultimate listening. He took a specialized, high-resolution microphone from his own kit and pointed it toward the ceiling of the cold room. He played back the recording, slowing down the frequency spectrum. The high-frequency tone from the vibrating dust cloud was a continuous, synthesized scream that cycled exactly 34 times, the same number of whispers Amelia Rhys mentioned. As Thorne listened, isolating the sound through his noise-canceling headphones, the synthetic scream gradually resolved itself into language. It wasn't a scream of pain, but a scream of instruction. The high-frequency tone contained a dense, complex data burst of architectural schematics, plans for modifying the concrete structure of the silo, complete with precise calculations for acoustic dampening. The instruction was clear. The echo, the accumulated sound of the structure, was telling its witness how to build a better chamber to trap more sound. The voice of the scream was flat, mechanical, and unervingly familiar. Suddenly, the residual sound of the 34th whisper in Thorne's headphones fractured. The dense white noise broke, and a faint, high-pitched cry cut through the static, a brief, agonizing sound of a child's distress. The cry was immediately followed by a raw, guttural weeping that was cut short. Thorne tore the headphones off, staggering back. The memory of the sound was intensely real. Reyes rushed forward. "What was that, detective?" "I didn't hear anything." "The accumulated sound, it's not just schematics," Thorne whispered, his throat tight. "It's collecting emotional sound signatures." The 34th whisper was a memory, a traumatic acoustic event. Thorne realized the terrifying implication of the child's cry. The echo was not just accumulating the building's sounds, it was consuming the acoustic signatures of people who died or suffered in the vicinity, and incorporating their voices into its instruction set. He looked at the precise arrangement of hair on the chair. The ear was meant to perfectly receive and process that emotional sound signature. As they stood in the corridor, the ceiling of the cold room began to pulse with a faint, chilling blue light emanating from the dense dust cloud. The light pulsed exactly 34 times. Detective Thorne felt a paralyzing cold spread through him, colder than the air in the sealed room. The faint, high-pitched cry embedded in the 34th whisper was not just a traumatic memory, it was a memory from his own past, the sound of his younger sister's distress moments before a fatal accident years ago. The echo had harvested a personal acoustic trauma and used it as a final component. The silence of Sector 9 was a trap tuned to his own grief. Thorne forced himself to focus on the cold room. The pulsating blue light from the dust cloud on the ceiling intensified, counting precisely to 34. The light abruptly extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. When the beam from Thorne's flashlight found the wooden chair again, the meticulously arranged hair ear was gone. In its place, resting on the seat, was a single, smooth, polished obsidian disc. The disc was perfectly cold and seemed to absorb all light. Etched into its surface was the same complex acoustic schematic Thorne had isolated in the high-frequency tone, the architectural plans for the better sound chamber. "The instruction set," Thorne murmured, picking up the obsidian disc. It felt heavy, unnaturally dense. "The echo has materialized the schematic." Reyes, pale and shaking, pointed at the concrete wall adjacent to the cold room. "Detective, look!" A small patch of the smooth concrete wall was bubbling faintly, emitting a low, resonant hum. As they watched, the faint outline of a single, immense speaker cone began to etch itself into the concrete, formed by the crystallization of the surrounding dust. "It's trying to build the chamber itself," Thorne realized. "The accumulated sound is trying to escape by creating a perfect acoustic conduit." Thorne held the obsidian disc. He theorized that the disc was the anchor, the physical key required to start the construction or guide the next witness. He opened the journal again. The final, horrifying line from Amelia Rhys was now visible, written in an agonizingly distorted script. The sound knows who listens. The anchor is created from the silent screams of the trapped. The next witness is the one who recognized the cry. Thorne knew the echo had identified him. He was the next witness. He had to disrupt the crystallization process before the speaker cone fully formed and amplified the devastating sound of the trapped echo. Thorne looked at the obsidian disc in his hand. He realized the echo had materialized the schematic from compressed sound energy. To destroy it, he needed to subject it to a sound that could not be compressed, a sound of pure, random noise decay. He instructed Reyes to bring up the heaviest industrial equipment they had, a large, powerful concrete grinder and a long extension cord. "We are going to use pure acoustic chaos," Thorne explained. "The echo thrives on accumulation and compression. We're going to create a sound that decays immediately and violently." Reyes set up the heavy grinder just outside the cold room. Thorne held the obsidian disc, positioning it directly in front of the emerging speaker cone on the wall. "When I say go, Reyes, hit the power, and do not stop until the grinding is complete," Thorne instructed. Reyes activated the grinder. The sound was immense, tearing through the unnatural silence of the corridor, a raw, grating screch of metal against concrete, utterly lacking in acoustic dampening. The obsidian disc in Thorne's hand instantly reacted. The disc didn't break, it vibrated violently, emitting a stream of intense, cold vapor as the chaotic sound energy attacked the compressed echo within. The emerging speaker cone on the wall recoiled and slowly began to dissolve, the crystallized dust melting back into residue. The echo was temporarily neutralized. The raw, violent screch of the concrete grinder was deafening, a deliberate act of acoustic chaos designed to attack the compressed energy within the obsidian disc. Detective Thorne felt the cold vibration of the disc intensify, and a blinding flash of internal white light erupted behind his eyes. When Reyes cut the power, the silence that followed was heavy and unnerving, punctuated only by the ringing in Thorne's ears. The obsidian disc, now inert and warm, fell from Thorne's hand. The emerging speaker cone on the wall had completely dissolved, the concrete smooth once more. Thorne knew the echo was defeated, but the cost was personal. The intense vibration of the disc had transmitted a final, fixed visual into his consciousness. He closed his eyes. Imprinted on the inside of his eyelids was a perfect, internal image of Amelia Rhys, the missing journalist, seated in the wooden chair, her face contorted in a silent, final scream. But the most disturbing part was that her mouth wasn't screaming sound, it was silently emitting a stream of the same fine, vibrating dust that covered the ceiling. The echo had fixed the silent scream of its last witness directly onto Thorne's perception. Thorne realized he was now the living echo chamber, the final repository for the sound that could not decay. He opened his eyes, wiping the sweat from his brow. The internal image lingered, an unwelcome permanent fixture. He then felt a sharp, localized pulsation deep within his throat. The sensation was exactly like the tiny vibration of a microphone diaphragm. The final, horrifying instruction from the echo wasn't a visual or a sound, it was a physical implant, a physiological change. He heard the synthesized voice, the core of the echo, not through his ears, but vibrating directly through his larynx. The construction is internal now. The witness must complete the perfect acoustic structure. The conduit is yours. Do not resist the accumulation. Thorne understood the chilling message. The echo was now attempting to use his own body as the perfect acoustic conduit for its final release. The trapped sound wanted to escape the silo, and his throat was the new, mobile speaker. He pressed his hand against his neck. The slight, rhythmic vibration was unmistakable. Reyes approached, looking horrified. "Detective, what was that flash? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Sergeant," Thorne managed, his voice sounding strangely resonant, almost too deep. "The equipment shorted out. The threat is contained." We need to secure the building and start processing Amelia Rhys's belongings. Thorne carefully picked up the now inert obsidian disc. It was just a cold piece of stone, but it was the material manifestation of the echo. He knew he couldn't take the disc back to the precinct. The inherent acoustic data was too dangerous. He looked at the vast, desolate concrete floor of the corridor. He took the high-powered concrete grinder and, without hesitation, drove the bit directly into the floor. He used the grinder to carve a deep, irregular hole in the thick concrete. He dropped the obsidian disc into the hole, then quickly used a bag of quickset cement to seal the hole, permanently burying the anchor of the echo. But the knowledge, and the pulsing conduit in his throat, remained. Detective Thorne managed to maintain a facade of control, burying the anchor, the obsidian disc, in the concrete floor and leaving Sergeant Reyes to secure the abandoned Sector 9 silo. But the internal threat was terrifyingly real. The rhythmic pulsation in his throat, the nascent conduit, was growing stronger. Thorne knew the echo was attempting to use his vocal cords and larynx to complete its full sound cycle, releasing the accumulated, trapped silent screams. He drove back to the precinct, trying to remain silent. The moment he tried to speak, the danger became immediate. He cleared his throat to confirm his location to dispatch. Instead of his voice, a brief, high-pitched burst of static, laced with the unnerving sound of the white noise from Amelia Rhys's recording, erupted from his mouth. The sound was instantly absorbed by the car's interior, but the force of the burst caused a dull, throbbing pain in his neck. The echo's voice resonated internally, cold and synthesized. The conduit requires calibration. Release the frequency. Thorne realized every attempt to speak would allow the echo to calibrate, integrating the trapped acoustic energy. He had to suppress his voice completely. He returned to the precinct and immediately went to his office, avoiding all unnecessary communication. He pulled out Amelia Rhys's journal again, searching for any detail she might have observed about the echo's weaknesses. He found a small, technical notation tucked into the back cover. The echo is sustained by symmetry. It uses equal input and output frequencies. The weakness is interference, a sound that is deliberately asymmetrical and non-repetitive. Thorne understood the principle. The echo was a perfect, compressed acoustic structure. He needed to flood his internal conduit with something messy, chaotic, and non-geometric, a sound that actively defied symmetry and repetition. He couldn't use the concrete grinder. The sound was too externally destructive. He needed an internal solution. Thorne walked into the precinct's medical supply room. He grabbed a roll of heavy, medical-grade acoustic foam and a pair of professional-grade earplugs. He applied the foam to the walls of his office, creating a temporary, sound-dampened chamber. He then put the earplugs in, isolating himself completely. He sat down and began the desperate attempt to disrupt the internal conduit. He started with a low, deliberate hum, not the dangerous high-frequency tone of the echo, but a raw, uncalibrated, human vocalization. The moment he hummed, the conduit in his throat pulsed violently, trying to seize the sound. The internal synthesized voice retaliated. Suppression is futile. The structure will be completed. Thorne pushed past the pain. He changed his humming frequency constantly, moving randomly through pitches, refusing to establish a stable, symmetrical pattern. He added intentional breaks, clicks, and gasps, creating a constantly shifting, acoustically chaotic internal field. He spent the next 2 hours in a torturous, self-inflicted sonic siege, forcing his vocal apparatus to generate only noise that the echo could not compress or integrate. The pulsation in his throat slowly, agonizingly, began to subside. The internal voice grew fainter, breaking into distorted, electronic fragments. The accumulation was stalling. Exhausted but resolute, Thorne emerged from his office. He couldn't risk speaking, but the conduit was dormant for now. He knew he couldn't maintain this internal siege forever. He needed to find the source of the echo, the origin of the original acoustic trauma that started the cycle in the silo, and destroy it physically. He pulled up the Sector 9 blueprints on his computer. He focused on the area beneath the cold room, the chamber. The plans showed a sealed, sub-level drainage vault, long decommissioned. It had been used to hold runoff chemicals from the industrial district, and was labeled ominously on the old blueprints, the retention tank. Detective Thorne, unable to trust his voice, communicated with Sergeant Reyes through written notes, explaining that the investigation required a deep dive into the historical records of Sector 9. He focused on the sub-level drainage vault, the retention tank. He needed to find the original acoustic trauma that initiated the echo cycle. Thorne accessed the city archives, cross-referencing the silo's decommissioning records with industrial accidents and missing persons reports from 30 years ago. The search hit pay dirt. 30 years ago, there was a major structural failure in the filtration system above the retention tank. An explosion had occurred, and the cleanup logs mentioned one casualty, a maintenance worker named Silas Karras. The report stated Karras was found, mangled, by debris. However, the accompanying police report, heavily redacted, included an obscure detail from a witness. Karras was last heard, screaming beneath the concrete, a muffled sound that was instantly silenced by the explosion's reverberation. Thorne realized the terrifying truth: Silas Karras's final scream had not decayed, it had been instantly compressed and trapped within the acoustically perfect concrete of the retention tank. Silas Karras was the echo's first victim and its source. As Thorne finished reading the archived report, Reyes entered the office. He looked at Thorne's handwritten notes about the retention tank with an air of deep, personal discomfort. "Detective, I need to tell you something," Reyes whispered, glancing around the empty office. "My real name is not Reyes. It's Karras. Silas Karras was my uncle." Reyes pulled out an old, tarnished silver whistle from his pocket. This belonged to him. It's a specialized signal whistle used by maintenance crews in the silo. My mother gave it to me. Reyes looked at Thorne, his eyes wide with fear and determination. "I never told anyone, but sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear a faint, metallic ring coming from this whistle. I think it's his scream, Detective. I think my uncle is the sound you're chasing." Thorne, unable to speak, felt the conduit in his throat pulse with renewed vigor. The echo was confirming the connection. It was using the acoustic memory of the trauma to target the victim's family. Thorne scribbled a furious note: "The echo is Silas Karras. The whistle is a frequency key. We go down to the retention tank now. I need you to use the whistle to counter the echo's core frequency." They immediately drove back to Sector 9. Reyes located the entrance to the retention tank, a circular inspection hatch sealed by 5 heavy, rust-eaten bolts, located directly beneath the area where the cold room, the chamber, was located. Thorne, using a heavy wrench, began to loosen the bolts. The moment the first bolt creaked free, a dense, cold fog began to pour out from the seam of the hatch. The fog didn't dissipate, it hovered, forming a thick, visible, acoustic cloud around the hatch, the materialized concentration of the trapped sound. The synthesized voice of the echo, now amplified by the swirling fog, resonated in the air. "The architect failed. The witness is here. Release the sound. The conduit is complete." The entrance to the retention tank was shrouded in a dense, chilling fog, the materialized acoustic energy of Silas Karras's trapped scream. The cold, synthesized voice of the echo resonated from the swirling vapor. "The conduit is complete." Thorne worked furiously, trying to undo the remaining bolts, his throat pulsing dangerously. The fog pressed against them, and Thorne realized the danger wasn't just auditory. The fog was the manifestation of a mangled sound, acoustic matter that could cause physical trauma. Reyes, his face pale but resolute, held up the tarnished silver whistle. "Detective, I think the fog is affecting my hearing. Everything sounds muffled, like I'm underwater." Thorne scribbled a note: "Blow the whistle. We need to find the core frequency. Use it to create a path." Reyes nodded, taking a deep breath. He brought the silver whistle to his lips and blew a hard, sharp blast. The sound that erupted was not the expected clear signal, it was a pure, high-pitched silver tone, a focused, crystalline frequency that cut through the silence of the silo. The materialized fog instantly recoiled from the silver tone, creating a perfectly circular tunnel leading directly down through the open hatch of the retention tank. The fog, however, remained thick outside the path. The echo's voice shrieked in pain and alarm, interference. The core frequency is attacked. The whistle is a key. It's working. Reyes yelled, the tunnel of clear air holding steady around them. Thorn finished removing the final bolt. He lifted the heavy, rusted hatch, revealing a dark, tight vertical shaft descending into the chemical vault. Reyes, Thorn wrote, pointing at the whistle, you are the only one who can keep the path open. Blow the whistle every 30 seconds. I need to be silent. Thorn clipped a light to his harness and began the descent. The air inside the shaft was suffocatingly heavy, cold, and smelled strongly of aged industrial chemicals mixed with ozone. He descended about 20 feet and reached the bottom, a small, circular vault floored with cracked, stained ceramic tile. This was the retention tank. The vault was dominated by a huge, corroded filtration pipe that ran vertically through the center. Around the base of the pipe, the concrete was severely damaged, and large fragments of metal and wire were twisted into the surrounding walls. Thorn realized the area around the pipe was the exact location of the original explosion and Silas Carraz's muffled scream. He approached the pipe. The entire surface was covered in a thick layer of fine, dry white powder, a completely different composition than the crimson powder from the penthouse. Thorn touched the powder. It was light, almost buoyant, and instantly coated his glove. He quickly recognized the substance from the historical records, acoustic dampening powder, a specialized compound used to line the tank and prevent the escape of industrial noise. The realization was immediate and terrifying. When the explosion trapped Silas Carraz, the acoustic dampening powder had not contained the sound, it had compressed the scream, chemically bonding the acoustic energy to the physical structure. Thorn's light caught a small detail on the base of the filtration pipe. Etched into the corrosion was a faint, repeating pattern of the spiral staircase schematic from Volkov's blueprint. The echo was physically attempting to draw its instruction set onto the original source. Suddenly, Reyes's whistle blast from above faltered. The silver tone became slightly ragged, and the column of clear air around Thorn began to constrict, the acoustic fog pressing in. The echo's voice was now intensely localized, vibrating through the metal pipe. The conduit is weak. The silence is hungry. The final scream is mine. The cold, physical fog, the materialized scream of the echo, pressed relentlessly against the shrinking tunnel of clear air created by Reyes's silver whistle. The synthesized voice reverberated through the metal pipe in the retention tank. The final scream is mine. Suddenly, the whistling stopped entirely. The clear tunnel instantly collapsed. The fog rushed in, thick and suffocating. Thorn felt a crushing pressure on his eardrums and a profound, chilling silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of absolute, concentrated acoustic dampening. The pressure caused the pulsing conduit in Thorn's throat to seize up, emitting a sharp, silent crack of pure static energy. The internal voice shrieked, "Release! Release!" Thorn fought through the blinding silence and looked up the shaft. He saw Reyes, 20 feet above, slumped against the railing, his eyes wide and vacant. The whistle lay abandoned on the concrete floor. The echo had used the acoustic fog to create a localized, crushing silence that physically incapacitated Reyes by overloading his nervous system with dampening pressure. Thorn knew he had seconds before the silence paralyzed him too. He had to find the core of the trauma within the filtration pipe. He hammered his flashlight against the corroded metal of the central pipe. The base was brittle from decades of chemical and acoustic stress. The metal cracked and peeled away. Inside the pipe, Thorn found the horrifying source, a large, solidified mass of the acoustic dampening powder fused with a corroded mass of human tissue, Silas Caraz's remains. The tissue was covered in the same fine white powder, perfectly preserving the moment of acoustic trauma. But embedded in the center of the solidified mass was a single, tiny, perfectly preserved larynx. It was covered in the dry, white powder, but completely intact. The larynx of Silas Caraz was the physical core of the echo, the original source speaker. As Thorne touched the remains, the echo's synthetic voice flooded his mind, now laced with the raw, desperate fear of Silas Caraz. "I didn't scream. I didn't get to warn them. The sound is mangled. It can only build. It needs the living conduit to correct the frequency." Thorne understood the truth. Caraz's scream was so instantly compressed that it was mangled into instruction, the architectural schematic. The echo wasn't malicious, it was a damaged, structural cry for help, seeking a live voice to finally express the warning that was suppressed. The mangled sound needed Thorne's throat, the living conduit, to correct the frequency and finally decay into normal sound. Thorne grabbed a heavy, industrial chain lying nearby, a thick, rusty length of iron. He knew he couldn't use his voice, but he could use the iron. He realized the echo needed to be overloaded with the sound of metallic decay, a sound that was pure structural chaos, the antithesis of the compressed acoustic symmetry. Thorne wrapped the chain around the solidified mass containing Caraz's larynx, intending to rip it out and shatter the core. As he pulled, the massive steel hatch above suddenly slid shut with an agonizing, grinding metallic shriek, trapping Thorne in the retention tank. The echo was sealing its new witness in the chamber. Detective Thorne was trapped in the retention tank. The heavy steel hatch was sealed shut, the pervasive, crushing silence was debilitating, and the echo had its source, the mangled larynx, right within Thorne's grasp. The internal conduit in Thorne's throat pulsed violently, forcing its final instruction into his consciousness, the architect's flaw. The conduit must release the warning. "You are the latest scream." Thorne fought the impulse to open his mouth. He knew if he spoke, the full, dramatic scream of Silas Caraz would be violently released, not as a warning, but as a devastating, destructive sonic weapon, the echo's final, desperate attempt to achieve acoustic symmetry. He tightened his grip on the thick, industrial chain wrapped around the solidified mass containing Caraz's larynx. He needed to destroy the core, but the metal-on-powder action wasn't chaotic enough. He looked around the vault floor, his eyes searching through the suffocating silence. He spotted a discarded maintenance tin, a small, circular can of industrial lubricant, half full and leaking. The can itself was dented and corroded. Thorne realized this was the perfect source of structural chaos. He needed a sound of total, uncompressed, non-geometric failure. Thorne jammed the sharp, rusted edge of the chain directly into the small can of lubricant, tearing the thin metal. He then began to violently crush and twist the thin metal can with the chain, generating a frantic, high-pitched grinding and ripping sound, a chaotic, asymmetrical shriek of metal failure that actively resisted compression or structural symmetry. The sound of the tearing metal, though faint, was like a lightning strike in the silence. The larynx core within the powder instantly reacted. The compacted acoustic energy, unable to process the random, chaotic metallic decay, began to destabilize. The white powder surrounding the larynx started to aggressively froth, turning into a volatile, bubbling foam. The synthetic voice of the echo shrieked in his mind, dissolving into the frantic, raw fear of Silas Caraz, and oh, the chaos! The warning will be lost. The symmetry. Thorne crushed the can one final time, generating an intense, deafening snap of tearing metal. The entire solidified mass of the echo's source violently shattered. The mangled larynx was ripped from its acoustic prison. The release was instantaneous and overwhelming. A massive, cold wave of pure, normal sound flooded the retention tank, the long-delayed, dramatic scream of Silas Caraz. But the sound was no longer mangled or compressed. It was a singular, agonized cry of human pain that instantly decayed and died, the first natural sound decay the silo had seen in 30 years. The silence was gone. The echo was destroyed. Thorne slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. The conduit in his throat went completely cold and inert. He was free. The reverberation of the scream, however, triggered a massive structural shift above. The heavy steel hatch above them groaned and slowly began to grind open. The immediate aftermath of the echo's release was a dizzying rush of cold air and sound. The final, pure scream of Silas Kara's had decayed, but its immense force had caused the heavy steel hatch to grind open, revealing a sliver of light from the level above. Detective Thorne was physically exhausted, his throat raw but blessedly silent. The conduit was gone. As the noise of the grinding hatch subsided, Thorne noticed the intense structural chaos had left a final, impossible mark on the walls of the retention tank. The surface of the concrete directly adjacent to the destroyed source was no longer smooth. It was permanently marked by a massive, high-relief imprint. The imprint wasn't random, it was the exact, detailed negative image of Silas Kara's face, contorted in his final agony, screaming silently. The concrete had physically absorbed and frozen the intensity of the traumatic sound wave at the moment of its release. Thorne realized the echo wasn't entirely destroyed, its physical consequence, the imprinted warning, remained fixed on the structure. A voice, rough but clear, finally broke the silence from above. "Detective Thorne. I can hear you. I can hear everything." It was Sergeant Reyes. The collapse of the silence had restored his auditory and nervous systems. Thorne looked up at the opening hatch. Reyes was looking down, eyes wide with relief and terror. "I know what happened, Detective," Reyes said, his voice now steady. "I saw the journal, I felt the silence. My uncle, he didn't want to hurt anyone. He just wanted to warn us about the building. He told me when I passed out." "He told you?" Thorne rasped, his voice weak but his own. "Yes." Not in words, but in a feeling, a sudden rush of dread right before the silence hit. "He told me the warning isn't about the sound being trapped, it's about the concrete itself." Reyes held up the now dented silver whistle. "He said the structure of the silo isn't a funnel, it's a resonator. The building is built on a fault line. The original explosion didn't cause the collapse, the concrete's frequency amplified the sound of a minor tremor, turning it into an explosion. The true, horrifying warning was revealed: the silo was a seismic weapon, an amplifier of structural decay. He said the full structural schematics, the 34 whispers, aren't for a better chamber, they are the pattern for the building's critical failure point." Reyes yelled down. "The echo was trying to tell us how the building will collapse next time." Thorne looked at the imprinted warning, Kara's screaming face fixed in the concrete. The structural collapse was imminent. "Reyes, the imprinted warning on the wall, I need you to look at the surrounding structure." Thorne yelled up. "The pattern on the ceiling, the dust, it's the weak point." Reyes, using a crowbar, finished forcing the heavy hatch open and dropped down a rope ladder. "I need to know the pattern of the imprinted warning, Detective. It will show us the fault line," Reyes shouted, pulling Thorne onto the rope ladder. As Thorne ascended, the walls of the retention tank began to moan, and a thick, horizontal fracture snaked through the concrete, running directly through the imprinted warning. Detective Thorne and Sergeant Reyes scrambled up the rope ladder, desperately escaping the collapsing retention tank. The cracking concrete beneath them was amplifying the sound of the developing fault line, turning the entire silo into a massive, groaning resonator. The heavy, horizontal fracture snaking across the concrete wall in the tank was a visual representation of the imminent structural failure. As Thorne climbed, he yelled a final, crucial detail to Reyes, who was bracing above. "Reyes. The imprinted warning. The eyes. Kara's eyes in the concrete are fixed on the center column. That's the main bearing point. The core of the resonance. Reyes, now fully aware of the acoustic danger, looked down the shaft. He saw the terrifying, silent, screaming face of his uncle imprinted on the wall, its eyes pointing directly toward the single, massive load-bearing column that stabilized the building's central acoustic chamber. The echo wasn't trying to escape the building, Reyes shouted back, pulling Thorne up. It was trying to warn us not to touch the central column. They pulled Thorne out of the shaft just as the walls of the retention tank began to implode, creating a deafening, pressurized vacuum. Reyes helped Thorne stabilize on the main corridor floor. The entire building was shaking, and the pervasive silence of Sector 9 was replaced by a continuous, low-frequency rumble, the sound of the foundation amplifying the fault line. "We need to get out. The building is going to amplify the Earth's natural frequency," Thorne yelled, pointing toward the main exit. As they ran, the pulsing rumble intensified. The central concrete column, the one Karaz's imprinted face had pointed to, began to visibly vibrate at an impossible frequency. Reyes suddenly stopped. He looked at the silver whistle in his hand, the key to the core frequency. The resonance, it needs a counter-frequency that can break the amplification, not just contain it, Reyes realized. "My uncle's whistle, it's the only metal tuned to the silo's original, intended frequency." Reyes looked at the rapidly vibrating central column, which was now emitting a high-pitched, metallic SERECH of structural stress. The sound was focused, symmetrical, and about to break the building. Reyes ran directly toward the central column. "Reyes, don't! The amplification will destroy you!" Thorne shouted. Reyes ignored him. He placed the silver whistle hard against the vibrating concrete of the central column. He then pulled the heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and, with a desperate heave, slammed the extinguisher against the silver whistle, fusing the metal against the concrete. The impact caused a catastrophic overload. The silver whistle, driven by the force, instantly injected its pure, concentrated silver tone, the anti-frequency, directly into the resonating column. The building did not collapse outward, it shuddered violently and then let out a deep, internal groan of immense structural relief. The high-pitched SERECH vanished. The central column instantly fractured and splintered, but the overwhelming rumble stopped. The chaotic, asymmetrical force of the whistle's destruction had neutralized the building's ability to amplify the seismic tremor. Reyes staggered back, the blast having thrown him against the wall. Thorne rushed to his side. "Reyes! Are you okay?" Reyes groaned, looking at the fractured central column and the melted silver residue where the whistle had been. I think my uncle is finally silent, Detective. But look!" He pointed back toward the abandoned acoustic chamber, the cold room. The entire structure of the concrete cell had contracted violently, imploding inward. And embedded deep within the new, condensed concrete was a final, horrifying geometric shape, a perfectly formed, frozen octahedron, the materialized structure of the echo's final, silent pressure. Detective Thorne surveyed the aftermath of the collapse. The silo was structurally compromised but stabilized, the deadly resonance had been halted. Dr. Elias Volkov's final, unintended warning had saved the city from a localized seismic disaster. They had successfully escaped the building, but the consequences of facing the echo were permanent and personal. Thorne and Reyes returned to the imploded cold room, which was now a small, sealed concrete chamber. Embedded deep within the newly condensed concrete, perfectly preserved by the cold, sound-dampening pressure, was the final, terrifying piece of materialized sound, a perfectly formed, frozen octahedron. The octahedron was a smooth, crystal-like geometry, radiating an unnerving silence. It was the physical embodiment of the trapped acoustic matter. Thorne carefully approached the octahedron, knowing it held the last fragment of the echo's consciousness. He touched the cold, sharp crystal with his gloved hand. The sensation was not auditory, but intensely visual and emotional. The crystal communicated a final, compressed message directly into his mind, a fixed, terrifying image of Dr. Elias Volkov's face, contorted not in despair, but in an impossible look of realization at the moment of his death. Volkov's internal scream wasn't about the descent, it was his final comprehension that his perfect structural geometry had created a trap for sound, not a void. His suicide was an attempt to provide the payment to close the dangerous acoustic limen. The final warning from the octahedron was cold and clear: the limen is closed, but the principle remains. Every perfect acoustic structure is a potential prison for sound. The witness is now the archive. The crystal went dark and inert, finally consumed by the silence it had always sought. Thorne carried the burden of the limen's knowledge. He knew the chaos he had faced was not supernatural, but a manifestation of unresolved physics, the consequence of acoustic symmetry and perfect geometry. The final consequences for the two detectives were indelible. The permanent burden. Detective Marcus Thorne became the archive of the terrifying knowledge. He suffered a permanent form of mild tinnitus, but not the ringing of noise, rather, a continuous, faint internal tone, the subaudible frequency of the 34th whisper, a constant reminder of the sound that can't decay. He could never again listen to music or natural sound without filtering the underlying awareness of the trapped frequencies. He resigned from active homicide duty shortly after, unable to bear the weight of the potential prisons he saw in every perfect architectural structure. Sergeant David Reyes, Caras Reyes, suffered a profound, permanent auditory change. The blast from the silver whistle, the pure counterfrequency, had destroyed his normal hearing range. He could no longer hear high-pitched sounds clearly, but the trauma left him with the inexplicable ability to detect low-frequency structural stress in concrete and steel. He could literally hear buildings groan before they failed. He left the police force and became a sought-after